Hello and welcome back to the Simplifiers podcast, where we take topics in business and in life and simplify them. Now, friends, we had this special guest on a couple of weeks ago. It was episode 103, and you might remember him. His name is Trevor Blake, and he was teaching us how to launch a startup the simple way. And, in our conversation, he managed to mention, sold 3 businesses, no big deal, $300 million, no big deal. And he only works 5 hours a day. And I thought, I'm going to put a flag on this one because I certainly want to bring him back and take a deep dive into that conversation itself. Well, welcome to the Simplifiers podcast, Trevor Blake. He's a serial entrepreneur, like I say, who built and sold 3 companies for $300 million since 2003. He's currently building and managing 2 more businesses focused on developing treatments for the most aggressive forms of cancer. He's a New York Times bestselling author, an award-winning screenplay writer, and happily married, 36 years strong Liverpudlian, now living in California and Seattle. I'd like to welcome to the Simplifiers podcast, Trevor Blake. Hey, Trevor, welcome back.
Thank you, Mary. Thanks for that introduction.
I'm so glad you're here because we did get a lot of good feedback from that episode, which, by the way, if you've not heard it yet, you can go to our show notes at thesimplifierspodcast.com and click to listen to that last one with you on it. But then you talked about the fact that you work 5 hours a day, Monday through Friday, and you've had great success. So I want to take a deep dive into how you structure that workday and really break it down for our listeners, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, it's perfect. I think it's because I shouldn't say only, because I work 5 dedicated hours a day that I've had that success.
Yeah.
I've never worked more than 5 hours a day, even when I worked in a regular career. But it was something I had to keep to myself. If I told my bosses I was only working 5 hours a day, I'd have been out of my ear. But the truth is, I won all the awards going, sales awards, marketing awards. I was on fast track promotion, but I couldn't reveal to anybody the reasons for what I believe to be the success, which is I learned a long time ago when I was in my early 20s how the brain works. Mm-hmm. And so we can only physically concentrate for about 2 hours a maximum. There are some psychologists who say it's 10 minutes is the maximum, but I think that's a bit extreme. But typically 2 hours is about enough. And everything you do after that 2 hour period diminishes rapidly in terms of productivity. And so I learned early on to structure my brain, if you like, rather than my work day. I suppose it should be the 5 hour brain day, really. Mm-hmm. And that is a 2 hour period of dedicated work and then switch off, leave the electronics behind, go and do something that's very distracting. So for me, that's like going for a walk in the woods or taking my dogs out or something.
Yeah.
In the old days when I was a full-time employee, I used to just drive to an old building somewhere, drive to a cathedral or to a castle or something like that, and I would just park up and just let the beauty of it, just sink in for about an hour. And by doing that, you recharge your brain cells. You allow those neural pathways to change, and you don't get burned out. And when you come back to the next dedicated work period, you're as sharp as if it's the first work period during the day. So that's really it's a very simple logic behind it. But I've done that. So as being an entrepreneur, I immediately fell into the trap of not doing that. Mm-hmm. Because I felt guilty because when I started my first company, I think, well, I must have to work all the hours God sends in order to be successful. And the opposite is true. And so I would sit at my desk and I'd wait for an email or I'd wait for the phone to ring, and I didn't dare leave the office in case that happened. So I even forgot to eat and all the rest of it. And then after a few months of doing that, you get pretty stressed out. I realized I was being dumb. Go back to the way that worked for me in a regular career. It was successful then. Why wouldn't it be as an entrepreneur? And things just took off. And the main thing is, in those distraction periods, that's where the magic happens. That's where you get those aha moments and this insights, great ideas and solutions to things you've been banging your head against a wall for ages, and suddenly you go for a walk and it pops into your head. And that's really why you structure it that way.
Yeah, and I want to point that out for the record. I think that what you just described is a lot of small business owners out there, people that are listening to this podcast right now. How many times have you been sitting in front of your computer waiting for an email to come in, waiting for somebody to pick up the phone and call you, waiting, and you're spending all that time kind of spinning the wheel, if you will. So why do you think we do that? Why do you think small business owners work those long hours and subscribe to that hustle and grind mentality of overwork these days? What's going on there?
I think it's indoctrinated in us. You can go back about 300 years to the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, 1740. Prior to that, I mean, I'm a Liverpoolian, as you mentioned, and so the Industrial Revolution started in England. But so you can look at, okay, what was it like before? So prior to that in England, people lived a very village-centric life, and if you care to look at any of the studies or the historical studies that are done at that time, they worked on average between 4 and 6 hours a day. But even that 4 and 6 hours wasn't 4 to 6 hours working solidly. They'd walk to the field, do some agriculture, or they'd weave their baskets, and then they go and replace the plants. They're very, very much into recycling back in those days, and so they lived a very gentle life. And the reason they did it was because work wasn't the most important thing in their life. Family was the most important thing in their life. Work was a means to feed the family, and leisure and rest were equally as important, and spiritual pursuits were equally as important as the work itself. And not only did they only work 4 to 6 hours a day on average, they only worked about 170 days a year. The rest of the time was leisure. It was a beautiful way of living. That I believe is in our DNA. And then, of course, along came the invention of the spinning jenny and things like that, and then power and steam, most of it. And so we became slaves to the machine. There was no lighting system in those days, so we had to work all the daylight hours that were available, and that's where we ended up getting these long, crazy hours and these manic shifts of 12 hours, 14 hours. And of course, everybody then had to commute to where the machine was positioned, and that's where commuting was invented, right. Slaving to the machine was invented, and so the average work day went from 4 to 6 hours to about 12 to 14 hours, and people were doing 80-hour weeks, and they had no alternative; they were slaves to it. That went on for about 250 years. And then, meaningful people have gradually reduced those insane hours from 80 a week to about 40 a week. And we think we're doing well. But I think it's in our DNA to have a balanced life. And that's why I write what I write, Secrets to a Successful Startup and the 5-hour workday. It's because I believe the two things shouldn't be mutually exclusive.
Yeah.
I know so many entrepreneurs who work 12, 14 hours a day, but they're on their third marriage. The kids hate them, and even the dogs don't recognize them. And that's no way of living. So for me, I live a nice, relaxed life. I'm highly productive in my 5 hours. I believe I'm successful. I know I'm blessed to be happily married to someone who's very special. But I'm also able to pursue my hobbies of writing, and also I have an animal sanctuary, so I'm able to spend time on that thing, which is a bit, it's just my thing. It's something I've always wanted to do, and I love having the time to do it.
Yeah.
So. You're only able to live that balanced lifestyle if you structure the workday with equal discipline for the off times as the on times. I think a lot of people say, this is a great idea. I'll dedicate 5 hours, so I'll do 2 hours. And then just at the end of the 2 hours, the phone goes. Mm-hmm. And so they postpone the hour off, and they say, I'll take this phone. And that goes on for half an hour. And now it's too late to go out and do anything, so I'll go back to work. And very quickly, the 5-hour workday disappears, and you get back to 8 to 9 hour workdays. And for entrepreneurs, burnout is a real issue.
Yeah, and your brain goes to jello. It's like a mess. I know for me, when I put in more than, say, 7 or 8 hours in a workday, I'm toast by the end of the day. I'm barely making complete sentences, which is not a good thing if I'm a public speaker and a podcaster. But yes, I totally can resonate with that.
And there's a degree of loneliness in being an entrepreneur too,
yes.
Because most people, when they're starting out, you're starting out by yourself, or it's 1 or 2 people, or 1 or 3 people. In the regular workplace, or if you come from being a homemaker in the house, there's so many social distractions.
Yeah. That
helps. That actually maintains, even though it makes you ineffective because of the distractions, it helps keep your sanity because there's an outlet all the time. Right. So in the 5-hour workday, I recommend that people get out and connect. So one of those off periods, go grocery shopping. And I get emails from people saying, I had no idea how much fun grocery shopping is in the afternoon because they're relaxed.
Well,
they talk.
Yeah. And that's the thing. I mean, I have, and I want to dive deep into how you exactly structure your workday. So we're going to get there in a second. But I know for a fact that that's the case when I go grocery shopping during the daytime or go work out at the gym at, say, 10 o'clock in the morning. It's a lot more of a pleasurable experience than trying to do it when all the other 9-to-5ers are trying to cram it in between, say, 5 and 8 p.m. at night, on a weeknight. It's a misery. Or desperately trying to do their big weekly shop on a Saturday when the shops are completely rammed tight. So yes, it's a whole different world. I think we forget as small business owners that we have the power to structure our workday and structure the times that we are on and the times that we are off. Because I think that the reason the long hours comes is that we are our own horrible bosses.
That's a good point.
We're
It's
the
well said.
worst, and we push.
We're hardest on ourselves than anyone else. That's
Yes,
for
we
sure.
push harder. And I think that there is also a bit of lack mentality there of, well, if I'm not selling all the time, or, where's that next new lead going to come from? What about lead generation, Mary? Like, what would you say to that person that says, well, I need to be selling 9 hours a day or I don't have a business?
That's the very person who needs to take the time off, because there's a magic to it, and it is scientific, and we probably don't have time to get into quantum physics here. But I'm a physicist I started out as a physicist, I guess. A perpetual student of quantum physics is how I describe myself now. The laws of energy are very clear, okay, and so what we have to do is try and figure out how can I better interact with the energy around me. And one of the worst things you can do is push yourself as hard as that, because by pushing, you push everything away from yourself. You'll actually find that if you push for sales leads, you'll get less than if you push a little bit and then take some time off. And in the time off, you leave your electronics at home, that's essential. But when you come back, there's a voicemail that you didn't expect from somebody who gives you probably the best business of the day, stuff like that.
Yeah.
You have to have the courage to understand that in the time off, you're not just being lazy and switching off. You're actually allowing your 100 billion neurons to go out and play. Because the rest of the time they slow down to help us do what we're doing now. Our brains are having to work really slowly for you and I to interpret our thoughts that happen instantaneously into words, and I use my hands a lot, into hand action, and I'm like Ricky Gervais on steroids half the time. And so you have to, this is very slow work for the brain. So when you switch off a little bit and go just walk in the woods or something like that, those 100 billion neurons, they're cheering and screaming and running around and going crazy. And when they do that, because you're made of exactly the same stuff as everything that's out there, they connect.
Yeah.
And it's that connection that brings in the magic. I know it all sounds very new agey and very weird, and I did used to live in California, so it fits with my background a little bit, but it works, and I'm living proof that it works. Those people who have taken it on board with their companies, most of them already have their companies, when they decide, I can't live like this anymore, I've got to make some changes.
Yeah.
When they make these changes, the emails I get and the texts I get from them saying about the magic is the best part of it. You never guess what happened to me today. I was in the coffee shop, minding my own business, and guess who I bumped into? And they've gone off on another venture. And that doesn't happen, if you're killing your brain cells by trying to force them to work, if you like.
Yeah. And so in your book, you talk about the active work, that when you're sitting down at your desk, you're laser focused in on whatever tasks that are on your plate. And then you talk about the relaxed state, the diffused state, where you are taking a walk out in nature. You are doing grocery shopping. You are doing something that's not sitting in front of your laptop waiting for an email to come in the inbox, and having intentionality in both things equally, not like this thing I do 80% and I only do this 20%, but like being equal in that time of active versus relaxed.
That's an important point, I think, for everyone who's listening. It's so after 2 hours, your brain's pretty tired. That's actually a good thing, because it's scientifically shown that in creative endeavors, you need a tired brain, not an active brain. The brain has to be sort of sleepy and, oh, God, no more of this. That's when that magic of creativity happens. And you can't be, we're entrepreneurs are creative people by nature. We're probably more artistic than we are scientific. And we, you want to come up with creative ways of doing the thing you've been doing for long and it hasn't been working. So you come up with a new marketing campaign or a new sales or a different pitch or stuff like that. That can only really be successful when your brain's actually tired. So it's an important point. So.
And in order to be tired, that's where it has to have rest, is what you're saying, right? And so then in the rest moments, that's where your brain starts connecting the dots, or you go, maybe I should call Brian, or, maybe I should connect with so-and-so and, see what's going on there. And then you start to see your opportunities in front of you. Whereas before you're push, go, sitting in front of a computer, hunched over, maybe you're not open to those opportunities that are already sitting around you, right?
Right. And also you're not being fair to everybody else in your life by working like that. And that has a cost at the end of it. I do know a lot of people who say, okay, I'm doing sort of a 5 or 6 hour workday, But then at nighttime, when they're supposed to be relaxed with their family, they've got the cell phone with them the whole time. And of course, you'd be a very strong-minded person if you don't answer it when something from business goes onto your cell phone at nighttime, because you think, oh, someone's calling me, it must be urgent. That's the thought process, isn't it? Same thing happens when they're working in the office. Your husband or wife calls and you think, oh, it's got to be emergency, I better answer this now. And you've blown the 2-hour dedicated time period. I would, how often is it an emergency? Probably very, very rare.
Yeah.
And so the discipline to switch off is critical, both at the 5-hour workday, but also at nighttime. You've got to dedicate yourself to the other things in your life, whatever they may be. The only way I can do that, because I'm not naturally disciplined, I'm a bit of a laid back guy, so I have to schedule everything, which I do. The online tools make it so easy.
Yeah.
But the one thing I do have in my life that I think has been a godsend for me is separate devices for work and separate devices for home.
It's so critically important to have separate devices, like separate cell phones, iPads, laptops for your work, and separate for your home. You also mentioned that, if you have a home office, that you lock the door behind you as well, right?
I do. Anything to avoid the temptation of just nipping in to see if there's an email, see if there's a voicemail. We're all human, and it's almost impossible to resist sometimes, and that's why it takes a little while. I think it takes, if you're starting out for the first time, it probably takes you 6 months to make it a habit to behave this way.
Yep.
And I'm not a saint. I screw up just as much as everybody does, so I make the same mistakes as everybody does. But generally speaking, I'm much more effective by having a disciplined schedule of active periods and inactive periods. And that inactive periods, it actually includes having a nap. It's totally alien for me to make myself have a nap in the afternoon, but I've read so many scientific studies showing how much increase in productivity there is from having that afternoon nap, particularly with females, believe it or not. And so, females get 66% increased productivity if a woman will give herself the treat of napping for 30 minutes in the afternoon.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
You heard it here first, folks. Trevor said we all need to take an afternoon nap. So we'll put that on our repeat and tell, if we work for another person, we just say, well, look, I heard it on the podcast, so it must be true. But, and I think it is true. I think you do need ability to reset your brain in simple ways so that you can come back to it fresh and ready. All right. So I really want to dive into how specifically you structure your work day. So can you walk us through that in particular? So what time do you get to your desk? What time do you do certain things?
Yeah, so this is a typical day I'll give you, because you have to change it up a little bit now and again just to keep it fresh. So I get up at 7 in the morning, which is half an hour earlier than I would say I need to get up, and I meditate. It's the first thing I do. I use a very simple meditation technique, but whatever turns people on, just give yourself that treat of 20 to 30 minutes of time for you. It might be the only time during the day that you get that treat, and you deserve it. Yeah. You're earning it. So I get up and I meditate, and I have to say I get a lot of great ideas in that first half hour of the day. I like to do that because in the morning it's so quiet. You're not going to get disturbed and everything. Even the phone's not really going anywhere. Yeah. So then 7:30, I make a pot of tea, because of course I'm English, and I take a cup of tea to my wife, and so she doesn't do meditation, so she gets a nice gentle awakening. Then I take the dogs out, and then by the time I come back, Lynn's downstairs, and we have breakfast together. We always insist upon that. It doesn't have nothing fancy, but typically that would take us through to, say, we're probably now around about 8:15, 8:30, and the important thing that you haven't heard me say, I haven't checked my inbox. I haven't checked voicemail. Yeah. I haven't gone anywhere near any of my devices. And if the home phone rings, we just ignore it completely. That's been critical for us. So I typically get to my office at 9 o'clock. Always say the same sort of joke. Lynn says, careful on your commute, because it's actually depending on which house I'm in, it's a separate room to the house, and it's about a 20-foot walk. Right.
Not very far.
No, I think, and most of your listeners are probably living in a similar sort of lifestyle where they've got an office in the home, but it is separate, and it does have a locked door, so no one could come in and disturb me during the day. Yeah. That's not as easy to achieve either, because friends and neighbors like to pop in, and they know with me now, I've been doing it so long, just don't go anywhere near there. Mm-hmm. So I get in about 9, and then I work 9 to 11, but the key thing is the night before, when I lock my office, I had a priority list that I did for the next morning. I do the first thing that's on the priority list, which is always the most complicated one, no matter what. So even if all my devices and phones are screaming for attention, they don't get any attention until I finish that one thing, because the danger is if you immediately go into your inbox, that takes you off in a completely different direction and nothing gets done on your priority list. So I guarantee doing one meaningful thing. And then, when I feel like it, check my emails, check my voicemails and stuff like that. And I'm a bit cynical, I suppose, but typically I find most of them aren't urgent, and most of them could have been sorted out by the person that sent it. So that's 10 to 11, and then from 11 to 12, I take myself for a walk in the woods. Sometimes I take the dogs with me. Sometimes the dogs are fast asleep, so I go by myself. No device with me. I leave it at home. If you for security reasons feel you need a device, put it on airplane mode, and because you can always quickly switch it off airplane mode.
Yeah.
But the dilemma is if you go for a walk and you take your device with you, the phone goes, and I see people like this all the time. It's got the phone on speakerphone and they're talking to. Why bother going for a walk?
Right.
You may as well go to the gym and do that, or work out at home or something like that.
Yeah.
You're missing the beauty and the majesty of the magic that happens when you allow your neurons just to go out and play.
And when you go on your walk, to clarify, you're not listening to music, you're not listening to podcasts, you are just in nature listening to the world around you.
Yeah, I try to shut my brain down a little bit if I can. I try not to think too much. It's hard. I mean, we've all got this chatterbox in the brain. But I follow my breathing as I walk sometimes to try and shut my brain up. Other times I'll just sit under a tree. And, it all sounds very new agey, but it's, the proof of the pudding is in the eating of it. So it's worked for me, and I wouldn't dare change it because it's worked so well for me.
Yeah.
It's not like I've sold 3 companies out of 12. I've sold 3 out of 3.
Yeah.
That's a pretty good hit rate.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So I'm back. I get back about 12, and then Lynn and I have lunch together. And so there are several books out there that have studied, one in particular that I like, studied 1,200 successful, wealthy people who were self-made. And so that I like to mimic other people's behaviors because that's the shortest route to success rather than trying to figure it out myself. And one of the interesting things is that they all have long lunch hours. I was fascinated by that. I thought they would be short lunch hours and running off to work in the afternoon. But no, they all take about 12 to 2 o'clock as a long lunch hour, and you dare not disturb them during that time. So I've taken, over the years, I've taken the same thing. So typically Lynn and I'll go out for lunch actually, and I'll be back by 2, and that's my next dedicated workday, dedicated time. I'll go into my office and I cheat a bit because I will take my nap in my office, but only because I've got a beautiful Park and All leather chair. It just, you sit in it and you go instantly to sleep anyway, whether you want to or not. So I do that. So I nap for about 20, 30 minutes. I've set an alarm for this. Okay. So I schedule everything so I don't have to think about it because my alarm when I'm there is telling me what's next.
Yep.
So it comes up and says, time for a nap, little baby, time for your afternoon nap. It's 20 or 30 minutes. And you know what? I come out of that and I'm so refreshed. And my brain is like sparkling with ideas that seem to happen because you don't get into a deep sleep. It's not long enough. So you're sort of in that magical twilight zone of slightly asleep, slightly awake. And I think, I don't know, it's just a beautiful place to be. So then I get into the work. So I'll work for 1.5 to 2 hours and then basically repeat. So between 4 and 6, I typically out with the dog or dogs or my animal rescue with the horses and all that sort of thing. And I don't do anything except dedicate my time to them, which is a wonderful and blessed thing to be able to do. So I've done about 3.5 to 4 hours work at this point. Going back to what we said about the creative endeavors and the need to have a tired brain, I like writing, all kinds of types of writing, and blogs and articles as well as books and screenplays. I find I'm most creative in the evening when I'm tired. So between the hours of 5 and 7, I do, strangely, just works for me. It might not work for anybody else. That's where I do my best writing. So I actually write while we're preparing dinner. So Lynn and I, we eat fresh always because I'm very much into what foods and what processes help the brain stay at peak performance. So we're very sensible with how we eat and drink, and the solutions to that would probably surprise a lot of people. What's good for you and what's bad for you is probably different to what you expect.
Yeah.
And so during that whole process, which lasts about an hour and a half, 2 hours, I do some of my best. So I just keep getting these ideas, and I'll spend 10 minutes cracking away on a keyboard. I have a computer specifically there just for that, and that's just done. And then 7 o'clock, everything's locked away in the office. So at 7 o'clock. The rest of the evening is just for us. Yeah. And it wouldn't matter. If it was a pope calling, we wouldn't answer the phone in the evening.
And what time do you go to bed, roughly, at night?
It varies. I'd say typically 11 to 12, something like that.
Yeah, so you are getting about 7 or 8 hours of sleep at night as well?
Yeah. Good sleep too. There's an exercise I do immediately before falling asleep, which is also in the books. It's in all everything I've written. It's in there. There's a nice little technique to do just before you're drifting off that can really set you up for peak performance the next day. And if I drift off without doing it and I forget, I know the next day I didn't do it because I feel very different.
And so I'm sure people listening to this right now going, wow, That feels so nice. I wish that was my work day. And the truth is, if you own your own business, that can be your work day. You can set those hours. You can at least try it as an experiment for this week or even just today and see how it goes. I think that it requires us to break our belief systems of more is better. If I just put more effort, more time, more, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have a successful business or a happy life. And it sounds like as well, right?
Right, and so you're right. The more you push things away. I truly believe, and the more you allow things to come to you, they do come to you. If you do it in a certain way, all I can say is you've got nothing to lose by trying it. So what I recommend to people, I like a little cynicism when people say, well, that's fine for you because you've made all this money and all the rest of it. But I didn't start out like that. I started out very poor. And I stole these ideas from some of the best and most successful people in history. This is how they lived.
Yeah.
And I wanted to live like that. I would have expected when I read one of the habits of successful people is they read a lot. And so I read at least an hour a day probably, but at least 2 or 3 books a week, and I've always got different books on the go. That's one of the habits I picked up from the wealthy and successful in all of these surveys and in the biographies. But the other thing is this type of work style is typical of someone who starts out with nothing and ends up achieving their dreams. And so I figured they're smarter than I am, so I'll just do what they did. So I gave it a go. It takes a little while to make it a habit, but I would recommend everybody just say, you know what, I'm going to do it for a week. And I'm going to make notes of how I feel this week, and then I'll do it for a week, and then make notes about how I feel the week after. And I don't think you'll ever go back to the old work style because of the magic.
Yeah.
Those moments of insight. A moment of insight is worth a lifetime of experience. So I would go after those moments of insights rather than trying to chase business.
And I think that there is some truth to this because I also have changed how I allow people to get into my schedule more so nowadays. Even since the last time you and I spoke, I've got a scheduler link that allows people to book in time with me or meetings with me. And I've been a lot more intentional about, really making them certain windows or certain days, and so that people can't pop up, at the very last minute into my calendar anymore. And so again, it's just remembering that you set the pace, you set the tone, and not working with a lack mentality of like, oh, well, I have to be available or I won't get the sale. I have to be available at all hours or I won't get blah, blah, blah. It's working in the absolute flip side, right?
Yeah, and the other thing happens, because we don't think about how other people perceive us. So I do the same thing. I use an online tool, and I block out, and it's easy to do because you only have to do it once, and it blocks out forever. So I block out all of my downtime on the thing. And I've had people, so I do the same thing. People try to book a telephone appointment with me or something, and when we get to the telephone, when we talk, they say, "My God, you must be doing well. You're so busy. I had trouble booking it." So they people like to.
Yeah.
If it was wide open, people would say it's not going very well, is it?
Yeah, like why is he so available?
Yeah, so you give this. I mean, it's a good perception to give that he's crazy busy. But I do it. I'll do it obviously because the scheduling is so important. But I don't think it's an issue to not have many openings. I think people are impressed by that.
Yeah. So, what advice would you give somebody who is shifting from a corporate 9-to-5 life of standing by the water cooler, catching up with friends, in the break room, or having 80 bazillion meetings in their life to being their own boss and launching that small business? What would you tell them?
Well, be prepared for it to take a while to adjust because I think I've talked a lot of people out of employment and into contracting. And I've been one of the contracts, and that's why I've talked them into it. And on average, it takes about 6 months for the guilt of having all this time on my hands to go, and the weirdness of what do you mean I don't need to spend time in meetings today? I mean, who you can most of the time. It's just me. So if you structure the business, I use a hub model, which is a contracting. People call it a model of alliances, which is a nice phrase for it. So in the hub model or the model of alliances, the business pretty much runs itself, except for the direction you have to give. You're like a conductor of an orchestra, and so it frees up an awful lot of time. So you need to give yourself a little time to adjust, and don't beat yourself up all the time. We're terrible at doing that. When I first started, I used to think, well, I must be doing something wrong. I've got all this time on my hands. I'm missing something. And then the tendency then is to interfere with the people who know what they're doing, who don't need supervision. The tendency is then to become a bit of a pain in the derriere to them. So you have to change your style. I mean, in most corporate workplaces that I've worked, almost everybody is some kind of control freak, because if you give someone a job, you're terrified that that job has to be it's got to be perfect because you want to impress your boss, and that boss wants to impress his boss or her boss, so they do the same to you. So you have a hierarchy of control. But when you work on your own, there's not all of that that's gone, and it takes a little while to adjust, and then you suddenly realize, my God, I haven't been in a meeting for weeks. Isn't it brilliant?
Yeah. Well, you feel like you're not wasting as much time or brain power to pointless meetings about meetings, right? I want to talk about this hub of alliances. I do this as well, and it took a big shift in running how I run my business. So the Simplifiers have been around for 16 years. We've only been doing this kind of model of, like the model of alliances, as you say, for the last maybe 4 or 5 years now. But so how does it translate in your business currently? That's what I'm curious about.
So think of it as a hub and spokes, and the spokes go out to all the different vendors that you need in order to get the project, whatever the project you're working on, to get that achieved.
Yeah.
So, if you've got a product and you're in the sales mind or sales mode, I always use contract salespeople to do it, because once you start hiring full-time employees, these days, it's true all over the world, especially in the West, these days, you are now a hand holder of employees from this point forward. It's so much work, and there's so many issues and so many laws that you have to follow, that your focus comes away from growing the business and into keeping employees happy. With the model of alliances, they have their own systems. They've got their own HR systems. They've got their own performance and appraisal systems. You don't have to do any of that stuff. Yeah. You just have to direct the contractor to achieve what you want them to achieve. So the business sort of runs itself to an extent, apart from the enthusiasm and energy that you want to give it as far as direction. And we work, so today, technology allows us to find vendors all over the world. In the old days, it used to be, well, I'll go and see if Bob wants to do my finances. He's down in the road here. Now my finances are done by somebody in Texas who I've never met. And they do a brilliant job, and I pay them for the job itself. So it's very inexpensive. So the overall result I find of this is, one, I'm able to keep my sanity, and I have fun running my business. Business can run itself. But number two, it's so much more profitable.
So
my businesses have been 75% net profits. So that's big.
So we're talking bookkeeping. We're talking social media management. I know I do that. I delegate that off to an agency. We're talking what else? Like executive administrative assistant work, like virtual assistant work?
Yeah, so it's everything. So it's everything you would have in all the functions of the business. Right. So basically, your accounting is delegated. Your marketing and sales is delegated. I work in a very regulated industry, so regulatory is delegated out. I have manufacturers and I have distributors. That's all delegated out. And I'm a very small customer to all of them. But they don't make me feel like a small customer. They treat me with the same deference as they would do as the Pfizers of the world or the GSKs. So everything is networked out. Over the years, there's certain contractors that you really trust that you've worked with on a regular basis. So when I start a new company, it's very easy because I've already found the people and we've already had fun working together. So they come into the system, very easily. Yeah. When you first start out, of course, it takes a little time to find the right vendors. And I think that's where women have a real advantage over men, because it's more important to get the right vendor than it is the right price. And in order to get the right vendor or supplier or whatever it may be, you need really good intuition. You need to feel it. Okay, so I've worked on my intuition for decades, because I've always been a little envious of women's intuition. But I think you have a real advantage as a female entrepreneur right at the beginning if you're doing the hub model or model of alliances, because it is a gut feel about who to work with and who to bring in. But the magic of it is no employees, no performance and appraisal systems, no one knocking on your door asking for pay rises. It's brilliant.
Right. And so you're a single employee kind of company with a network of agencies or, affiliates or alliances that you say you're delegating the work out to them. So they may be freelancers, they may be contractors, they may be, like I say, like social media marketing agency that you trust with that specific piece of work or tasks that would have been in-house with an employee, right?
Right, so that's correct, and big advantage is that you could scale up or scale back according to cash flow because things don't always go in a straight line.
That's right.
You're going to hit some road bumps along the way. It's very hard when you've got full-time employees to see them sitting around doing nothing because demand has diminished. With contractors, they expect the up and down of the early stage companies. That's not an issue, and it works really well. So that's a vital part of the whole thing. Cash flow management is possible because of the model of alliances.
And with that, real quick, then, do you have those contractors or alliances sign non-disclosure agreements and things like that, confidentiality agreements, so that your trade secrets, your things are not being spread out to other people?
Right, and usually the non-disclosure agreement is included in the contract you have with the contractor.
Right.
And you have to remember that probably you're their smallest when you start out. You're their smallest client. They've probably got a lot of really big clients. They've been through this 100 times. The contract is likely to be as airtight. It's been touched probably by 100 different lawyers around the world. It's about as tight and as airtight as it could possibly be. So you don't need to do all that. You can trust that this is going to be a fair contract, and maybe you just change a few things to suit yourself. But you don't need to get caught up in wordsmithing or have to hire an attorney to sort through, because if it's a brand new company that's never done it before, then you should be a bit leery because you want a vendor with a track record.
Right.
But these vendors have their own armies of lawyers, and so you can be pretty sure that the contract with the non-disclosure is about as airtight as it gets.
So again, just a reminder of some of the big things that Trevor's talked about here so far. When structuring your 5-hour workday, separate devices for home and for work, right? Which includes your phones, your iPads, your tablets, your laptops. Locking the office door at the end of the workday. Locking your business devices down, put them in the office, right? So when you leave, that you're not tempted to, just one more email, or having that phone out on the dinner table at night. I love the idea of having a task list. What's the most important thing that I need to accomplish tomorrow? Like writing that out at the end of your workday, having that there. It's the first thing that you take a bite of when you get into the office the next day. Talking about keeping your work sessions to 2 hours or less and really staying laser focused in. And again, try this out. Try it out for a week. I encourage you guys, if you're listening to this right now, go to Trevor's website. So all the links are in our show notes, the simplifierspodcast.com. And there you can actually download this free guide, The Practical Magic of the 5-Hour Workday, for free, and get a taste of it and see what you think of this and put it to the test and see if it works in your lifestyle and see if it releases some of that stress and burden that sits on your shoulders currently. And, you never know, your partner might actually love you a bit more. Your kids will appreciate you more. They go, oh, there's something different about her today. And give it a test for you as well. So, Trevor, I have a few questions that I want to ask you. I ask everybody. And again, thank you again for sharing this on our podcast today, because I think it is powerful stuff. And once you realize that you can do less and actually accomplish more, it's a game changer, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It is. It's so much fun.
Yeah.
Life is so much less stressful and so much more fun when you do it this way.
Yeah. So tell me, what's one book or blog that you're reading these days that's either inspiring you or poking holes and challenging your belief system?
I'm reading A Change in Time by Ravelli. He's a theoretical physicist, and he's got a very, the illusion of time is the one thing that helps us keep our sanity. But because I'm all into productive brain and relaxed brain and that sort of thing, learning how time doesn't exist and how to perceive past, present, and future is fascinating to me. So I'm reading that. It's a very inspiring book. It's mind blowing actually. But I read it in tandem with Helena Blavatsky's Secret Doctrine. That's a metaphysical book or a theocracy book, and the two dovetail very well together. So I'll read a chapter of A Change in Time and then a chapter of Blavatsky's, and it's actually making Blavatsky's book come alive to me a bit. Very hard, difficult book to read. Not the sort of book you can read from beginning to end, but so those two are dovetailing very nicely right now.
Love it. Well, we'll put a link in the show notes for both of those books if you guys want to check it out. Tell us, who's one person that you just feel is up to brilliant things right now? We could shine a spotlight on them, and who knows, maybe one day we'll have them on the podcast.
Yeah, I go back to, so I'm an investor in a number of different companies, of course, so I'm slightly biased about who I think is going to do brilliant things. So I really like Blake Bartholomew's concept for SolarX works. They basically have invented a solar-powered air conditioning system that doesn't need ever to be attached to the grid. So So, from a philanthropical standpoint, I think it has huge potential, but also from a global standpoint, their focus at the moment is primarily on extending post-harvest refrigeration. Because in a lot of companies where a lot of countries where they don't have air conditioning, about a third or half of the harvest gets wasted. It just deteriorates. So if you can keep it going longer, you can really serve that and make a huge impact in the world. So that, but I also, we are always talking about how you can take the same concept and get medicines that need to be refrigerated into the most hostile environments. So I think they're right on the cusp now, I think, of shaking up that world a little bit. So I'm pretty excited.
Yeah. Well, again, we'll put a link for Blake in the show notes for people to check him out. I think it's so fascinating when you think about certain technologies and things that are going out in a global way like that could change a lot of different industries. I see it with farming, what you're talking about there, but also war zones in order to have what you need, air, refrigeration, electricity, all those things without having the grid. It's incredible. So I believe gratitude and simplicity go hand in hand. Tell me, what's one thing you're grateful for these days?
Oh, I'm grateful for so much. I mean, my wife, number one above everything. I'm so grateful that she's been such a support to me for the years. I met her 39 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
She was my mother's chemotherapy nurse, so we bumped into each other, and just have been bumping into each other ever since. So that's always at the top of my priority list.
And I think it's beautiful to hear you state that every single day when you work, as much as you possibly can, you have it built into your work schedule, that in your life schedule, that you're having a cup of tea with your wife, you're having breakfast with her, you're having lunch, and it's those quality time moments that really make a life that's full of joy rather than a life full of grind and work and misery, as sometimes our lives go to, right? It's beautiful.
I couldn't imagine it any other way.
Yeah. So Trevor's website, again, is trevorgblake.com. All the links are in our show notes. Is there anywhere in particular that people could connect with you online? Are you on social media?
No. So I'm on Facebook. I have some private Facebook groups that they can sign up, but just go to trevorgblake.com and the links go from there. That's also a model of alliances. So from there you could link to wherever you want to go, books, courses, or sign up for the private work groups. They're very popular, the private groups, because they're safe havens to discuss all this without being criticized, because everyone's of a like mind.
And can I just say that I asked you that question intentionally because I know a lot of super successful people who are like, no, I don't do social media. And you know what? There is something to that, you guys. I really think there is. So my final question for you today is this, Trevor. And again, thank you so much for sharing a little bit behind the Wizard of Oz curtain and letting us see how you structure your workday and how I can see it if you're watching the video version, you can see it on his face. There's joy, there's ease in how you carry yourself. So there must be something that's working with this. Someone somewhere is listening to this episode right now and she's thinking, you know what? Maybe I will try this. Maybe I will not work 10, 12 hours today, but I'm going to try to do a 5-hour workday and see what kind of release comes from it. But she's got that little negative Nancy voice, that gremlin sitting on her shoulder that's going, but what if? What if you don't bring in enough sales? What if the whole business crumbles by working less? What's one thing you could whisper into her ear right now just to encourage her in this moment?
Just do it. Just do it. Prove it to yourself. Prove it works or it doesn't work for yourself. So the way to do it is to say, I deserve a week's vacation. And so instead of going away for a week in the sunshine, or that might be very appealing in England right now, but instead of going away for a week's sunshine, do this for a week instead.
Yeah. And see what happens.
Yeah.
Trevor, thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome. Thank you, Mary. It's always a pleasure.